Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. One of the biggest obstacles to actually being in your practice for real, for a lot of people, is wanting to know how to do it. That's an obstacle. You say, I don't know how to do that, or I'll try to figure out how to do that before I do it. You can't figure it out before you do it. You can't know how to do it before you do it. And you can't know the result of it before you do it. At least 80% of spiritual life is like this. Real spiritual life. Of course, anyone can sit around listening to a meditation CD or rotely following instructions like watch your breath or whatever. Anybody can do that. And even the more complicated practices, anybody can do them shallowly as if they were just a pro forma of some sort, a protocol. And they just go along doggedly following that pro forma or that protocol. And you could go on like that for years and never really actually be in the practice. Because the practice is a living situation. It's a living conversation. It's a living encounter. And just like any conversation or encounter, you have to be in it and feel and listen for what's happening and respond. You can't know how to do these things before you do them. For instance, I like to use the example of diving off a diving board into a swimming pool. You can study 1 million books about diving off a diving board. You can watch YouTube videos about it. You can have a teacher talk to you about how to do it, but you still won't know how to do it. Right? You're not going to know how to do it until you actually do it. And it's the same with spiritual practice. You can get a lot of instructions, but the essence of it, no one can tell you how to do. If you stick around, you're going to arrive at this point over and over and over and over again. And just think of it like diving off a diving board or diving into a river and swimming. You just do it. When you go into a body of water, you don't know exactly what it's going to be, how's the current going to be, what obstacles are you going to encounter, how strong is it going to be, how deep is it going to be, how cold is it going to be. You don't know all those things. And you just dive in and you deal with it. And somehow you figure out how to swim in that water. And this is the same. So I can tell you, consult the cells of your body. You just have to try. You have to just noodle around in there, and just keep asking and listening for an answer, feeling for an answer.
Something that I've been noticing more and more is how much I need to control everything and feel like I'm in control of every situation I enter into.
Just laugh at yourself about that as much as you possibly can. Because if you just step back from it 1/4 of an inch, you'll realize how absurd it is to think you can control things. It's a completely doomed project. This is why teachers and traditions, or maybe they're not even traditions, maybe they're just pyramid schemes. Teachers that promise you mastery, run away quickly. That's not the way. That's not the attitude to enter into spiritual life with, that you're going to become a master of anything.
Could you please talk about the practical esoteric aspect of Sri Yantra?
The Sri Yantra is from a tradition called Sri Vidya. It's one of the major forms of tantric practice. It's not clear where it originated in the conventional sense, but there are Sri Vidya teachings from North India and South India. You cannot get what you need from a book. And you wouldn't be initiated into a practice like that, at least if the teacher is following a wise course. No one would give that practice to someone who wasn't prepared, who didn't have a lot of preparation doing other things first. Yantra practice is not as easy to connect with as some other practices. It is more subtle. The yantra itself is a map of all of manifest life. And it is giving a certain transmission, which I wouldn't talk about in public. Not because it's like, woo, but mostly because we are so eager to be important and special. This might not be you, but certainly in the US, to have the highest practice, the best practice, to sound authoritative, to know the answer before we've actually done anything and put in the effort. That for me to describe what the fruit of that practice is would actually be harmful for people. Then they would think they know something about it, which they wouldn't. There's very specific mantras that go with that practice. They're very famous mantras. They're supposed to be secret, but of course now they're all over the internet. There's different variations of them. Like the North Indian practice is really different from the South Indian practice, although there are some crossovers in the more esoteric explanations of what it's all about. But basically, all of manifest life is coming out of the center. And the North Indian practice is much simpler, more of a direct realization practice, and that's the practice I was taught. The South Indian practice is a very, very elaborate puja. And I'm sure there are other forms of it in South India too, I wouldn't really know. But the reason I know that, aside from you can read it in a book, is that there was a pujari from some village in South India who came to the Bay Area many, many years ago when I was living here. He came from this matrilineal Sri Vidya tradition, really rural. I don't know how he ended up here, but he was just such a fish out of water. You could just tell that he just felt completely out of his element here. And he was trying to make a living doing puja, but he didn't have any helpers, and it was kind of poignant what he was going through. He eventually wrote a book about his village and the practices they did there. But anyway, he wanted to teach me the Sri Vidya that he had been taught. And he basically said that, it would take me many years to learn this puja, and then I'd have to do it every day, and it would take hours every day. That was the commitment. And I was just like, I'm not going to do that. That's just not the kind of practice that I do. I'm not a pujari. I don't want to be a pujari. So I politely declined. I'm very satisfied with the practice I was given from North India. Ananda Mahima taught some version of Sri Vidya practice with the Sri Yantra. I don't know what it was. There's one person alive today who was taught it by her. But I do know that she taught it to very, very few people. And I've only ever taught it to one person. I wanted to teach it to more people because sometimes I just feel there's certain restrictions that I just get tired of. I think I just get tired of not being able to give the practice to more people, or not just that one, but other ones too, because they feel like they're in me and I want to give them away. But then if there's not someone who's prepared to receive them, I have to hold back. So sometimes I just go, I'm just going to give them to everybody. I get into that mood. I wanted to give this Sri Vidya practice to a bunch of people, and I did a divination about it. It was like yelling at me and excoriating me, telling me, no, 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 no. So that was that. But there didn't used to be all these books around and the mantras online. The Sri Yantra is one of the most culturally appropriated symbols in the world, I think, today. Westerners get tattoos of it on their bodies. They haven't been given the practice. They just think it brands them as somehow being spiritually superior. Yoga studios use it in their logos. Western makers of Ayurvedic herbs put it on their vitamin bottles or their herb bottles. It's probably a bath mat. I don't know. But it seems like everywhere you look, there's some version of that being waved around like a brand by people who have not ever encountered that practice, have no intention of doing it, and are just labeling themselves with it in some way or another, appropriating it for their own self-aggrandizement. And that's not really that fun to encounter. There's also a lot of different versions of the mantra. People like to get, as they say in Britain, maybe you know this phrase because of colonization, people, especially Westerners who are Sanskritists of some variety, and then Indian people who are trying to reclaim Sanskrit, will get very dogmatic about Sanskrit, that there's only one way to pronounce everything. And as you know, I'm doing the Mahamrityunjaya online. Actually, I've been initiated into that mantra by a couple different teachers. And I went and I listened to the way they pronounce it. One of them is from North India and one's from South India. And there's another one who's a Westerner, but the two main ones are from North and South India. And they pronounced it totally differently. And they're both from India, Indian spiritual teachers. So I just thought that was really funny. And of course, there's many, many regional differences. And the real thing is that you just pronounce it the way your teacher has practiced it. That's the way to get the benefit of it. But anyway, there's many versions of the 16-syllable mantra that goes with the Sri Vidya practice. There's not just one version. There's variations on it. That didn't quite answer your question, but that's as much as I'm willing to say.
That was actually very helpful because it is made to look very esoteric and intriguing, and just like you said, you want the greatest practice.
Yeah. The same thing happens with Dzogchen and Kagyu. I've heard Tibetan lamas talk about this, that all the Western students only want the practices they consider to be highest. So the lamas oblige, some of them oblige, and they'll come to the United States and teach non-conceptual meditation without having ever taught a student before. Just, okay, fine, that's what you want. You think that's the highest practice. Or Dzogchen itself, because within Tibet, Dzogchen is considered to be the highest practice in Tibet. And no real Dzogchen teacher would talk about it that way. But people do talk about it that way. And so every lama who's over here who wants to attract a bigger Western audience will say that they're a Dzogchen teacher. And I've definitely heard lamas giving Dzogchen teachings that were not Dzogchen teachings. Not at least from what I've learned from my teacher. Because they were sort of from a different tradition. Maybe they had some Dzogchen empowerments from somebody one time or another, and they know that that's what sells among a certain audience in the United States. One of the more fascinating things to me about the whole conversation about cultural appropriation is there's oftentimes hidden within it this privileged bias that only the privileged appropriators are seeing the people they're appropriating from. They don't realize we're being seen back. We're being seen back. And we are also being used in some cases. There's many, many teachers from Tibet and India. They see what condition we're in. They see how easily we are fooled by our own hubris and our own pride. And they take advantage of it with a wink and a nod. And I think that that's really, really interesting. And there's a lot more layers to it. But there is often this assumption, unspoken or unacknowledged assumption, when Westerners are talking about cultural appropriation, that we are doing something one way to this group of poor others who they don't even see it coming. Yeah, they see it coming and they're using it. I have to say that I've been to India 4 times for not hugely extended periods of time, but from a month to 3 months at a time. And I have never been in a culture where there was so much irony, just in the general culture. And irony has a lot of clarity. In order to really have a sense of irony, you have to have some clarity about things. One time, someone I really care for, but he comes to the United States and gives KIRTAN concerts and basically just does the Indian holy man for the Western audiences. And with a sense of irony that I don't know if people notice or not. And I once mentioned it to a friend of mine. Does this seem like, this is what's happening to you? He's playing this role. He's coming here. He needs the money for his ashram. He sees what condition we're in. He has some idea of what we're expecting of him. And he's giving us what we expect, or his view of what we expect from a visiting Indian sadhu. So I just think there's so many layers. And believe me, I'm not criticizing anybody for doing it. I'm just pointing out that there's like two-way vision happening. And we are a lot more obvious than we think we are. Here in the West, we're a lot more obvious. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.